Her husband divorced her after she became crippled, calling her a dead weight, unaware she is still a billionaire, then invited her to his wedding with her best friend to humiliate her. But her arrival shocked them all. "You're nothing but a dead weight now." Vincent's voice cut through the hospital room like a blade. Elena Castellano lay in the bed, her legs motionless beneath the white blanket, her body still recovering from an accident that had happened a week ago. The doctors had been clear she would never walk again. The news had been equally clear. Her father's Billionaire company had collapsed into bankruptcy. Every asset liquidated, the empire reduced to nothing. And now her husband stood at the foot of her bed with divorce papers in one hand and her best friend's hand in the other. "I can't do this, Elena," Vincent continued, each word deliberate. "I can't spend the rest of my life taking care of someone who can't even stand up. Someone who's lost everything." Natasha stepped closer, her hand resting possessively on Vincent's arm. The touch too familiar, too comfortable. Speaking of intimacy that had been building long before this moment. "This is for the best," Natasha said softly, her voice dripping with false compassion. "You need to focus on your recovery, and Vincent needs to move forward with his life." The way they stood together, bodies angled toward each other, fitting perfectly, told Elena everything about how long this had been happening. "Sign the papers," Vincent said, dropping them onto her lap. "Let's end this cleanly." Elena's hand trembled as she reached for the pen, not from weakness, from something burning in her chest that had no name. She signed one signature that ended everything. Vincent took the papers without another word, and they left together, his arm wrapped around Natasha's waist, their bodies pressed close as the door clicked shut behind them. Elena stared at the ceiling, silent. 1 year later, an envelope arrived, thick, expensive, cream-colored with gold lettering. Inside, a wedding invitation. "Vincent Kane and Natasha Williams request your presence at their wedding." And beneath it in Natasha's handwriting, "Elena, we'd be honored if you could join us. We know it's been a difficult year for you, but we wanted to include you in our happiness. The venue is fully accessible for wheelchairs. We made certain of that. Please come." The cruelty was perfect, expertly crafted. They wanted her there, broken and defeated, in her wheelchair to validate their happiness. By contrast, Elena read the note 3 times. Then she picked up her phone. "Book the jet," she said, "and arrange full security. I have somewhere to be." On the wedding day, the venue filled with guests. Vincent's business associates, investors, partners, everyone who mattered in his new life. Inside the bridal suite, Natasha adjusted her veil one final time. "Do you think she'll actually come?" she whispered. "Doubtful," Vincent replied, checking his reflection. "But if she does, everyone will see exactly what I escaped from." The ceremony was minutes from starting. Guests settled into their seats. The string quartet began playing, and then someone near the entrance made a sound, something between a gasp and a choke. Another guest turned, then another. The whispers started, a ripple that spread like wildfire through the assembled crowd. The music faltered. One violinist missed a note, then stopped playing entirely, her bow frozen midair. Vincent looked toward the commotion, irritation flashing across his face until he saw the doors stood open and Elena Castellano walked through them. Not in a wheelchair, not broken, walking in heels that clicked against marble with each confident step, in a gown that shimmered like power itself, surrounded by security detail that moved with military precision. She moved through the venue, and the crowd parted before her like water. Every eye followed her, not in pity, in shock, in recognition, in something close to awe. The whispers grew louder. "Is that she's walking? How is she? I thought she was." Vincent's face drained of all color. Natasha swayed on her feet, her bouquet trembling in her hands. The MC approached Elena, his hands shaking as he extended the microphone. "Miss Castellano," he stammered. Would you like to address the guests?" Elena's fingers closed around the microphone. She looked at Vincent, then at Natasha, then at the room full of investors and partners who were beginning to whisper among themselves, phones already emerging from pockets. She smiled, and what came next would change everything. In this story, you will learn the devastating cost of judging people by temporary circumstances, the consequences of betrayal during vulnerability, and how dignity and patience triumph over cruelty and greed. Before we continue, kindly hit the subscribe button and tell us where you are watching from. 7 years earlier, Elena Castellano had been the girl everyone noticed when she walked across campus. Not just because her father owned half the tech companies in Silicon Valley, though that didn't hurt. Rather, because she moved through the world with the kind of confidence that came from knowing exactly who she was and what she wanted. She could have chosen anyone. The business school was full of ambitious men from wealthy families, young men whose futures were already mapped out in boardrooms and country clubs, men who understood the language of power and privilege. Instead, she chose Vincent Kane. He came from nothing. A scholarship student working 2 jobs to afford textbooks, living in the cheapest apartment he could find, eating ramen more nights than not. But he was smart, driven, and when he looked at her, he didn't see a billionaire's daughter or a trust fund or a stepping stone to success. Or at least that's what Elena believed at the time. He saw her, or so she thought. Their wedding was small, intimate, exactly what Elena wanted, despite her father's suggestions, for something more elaborate and befitting the Castellano name. "You're sure about this?" her father had asked the night before the ceremony, his hand on her shoulder, his eyes searching hers with the kind of concern that came from loving someone too much to watch them make mistakes. "I've never been more sure of anything," Elena had replied, and she'd meant it with every fiber of her being. 1 year into their marriage, her father died. The heart attack came suddenly, violently, stealing him away during a board meeting, where he'd been arguing passionately about the future of the company he'd built from nothing. The empire passed to Elena. All of it, billions in assets, thousands of employees, decades of legacy, condensed into documents that bore her signature and her responsibility. The funeral was enormous. Tech giants and politicians and philanthropists filling the cathedral to capacity, though Elena barely remembered any of it through the fog of grief. Vincent stood beside her throughout, his hand on the small of her back, his presence steady and supportive in ways that made her grateful she'd chosen him. 1 month after her father's burial, Vincent approached her in the study where she'd been reviewing financial reports. "We need to talk," he said, his voice carrying an edge she didn't recognize. Elena looked up from the papers spread across the mahogany desk her father had imported from Italy. "About what?" "The company." Vincent sat down across from her, his posture stiff and formal. "You're overwhelmed, Elena. Anyone can see that. You're trying to run a billion-dollar empire while grieving your father, and it's too much for one person." "I'm managing," Elena said carefully, sensing something beneath his words that made her uneasy. "Barely." Vincent leaned forward, his eyes intense. "I've been thinking about this, and the solution is obvious. Transfer control to me. Let me help you manage it. I can handle the day-to-day operations while you focus on healing." The request landed between them like a stone dropped into still water. "Vincent, this is my father's legacy. Which is exactly why you need help protecting it," he interrupted, his voice rising slightly. "I'm your husband, Elena. I should be leading this family. That's what a man does. He takes care of his wife, manages the household, makes the difficult decisions." Elena felt something cold settle in her chest. "The company isn't a household, Vincent. It's a technology empire that employs thousands of people and affects millions more. My father spent 30 years building this and he left it to me because he trusted me to protect it." "He left it to you because you're his only child," Vincent said, his words sharp now cutting. "But that doesn't mean you're qualified to run it. You're what, 26? You've never run anything this size." "I have an MBA, business experience from working entry-level positions for 2 years, Elena said quietly, her voice steady despite the anger building inside her. "My father trained me for this my entire life, Vincent. I've sat in on board meetings since I was 16. I understand this company in ways that can't be taught in business school." Vincent stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "So that's it? You don't trust me enough to let me help your own husband?" "This isn't about trust," Elena said, though she was beginning to wonder if perhaps it was. "This is about responsibility. My father built this empire from nothing, and I will protect it with my life. That's not negotiable." The look Vincent gave her then was something she'd never seen before. Not love, not understanding, something darker, something that looked almost like hatred. "We'll see about that," he said softly. Then he walked out of the study, leaving Elena alone with documents that suddenly felt heavier than they had moments before. She didn't know it then, though looking back she would recognize this as the moment everything began to unravel. The first thread pulled from a tapestry that would eventually come completely apart. Outside the study window, storm clouds were gathering. Elena returned to her papers, unaware that inside her own home, a different kind of storm was already brewing. 6 months passed and the distance between Elena and Vincent grew wider with each passing week. He stopped asking about the company, though his resentment hung in the air like smoke, thick and suffocating and impossible to ignore. Natasha started visiting more often. Elena's best friend since their freshman year of college, the girl who'd been her maid of honor, the woman she trusted with secrets she'd never told anyone else. "He seems unhappy," Natasha said one afternoon while Elena was packing for a business trip to Tokyo. They sat in Elena's bedroom, sunlight streaming through the windows, everything appearing normal on the surface while tension simmered beneath. "We're going through a rough patch," Elena admitted, folding a blazer into her suitcase. "He wants control of the company, and I can't give him that." It's created friction. Natasha's expression shifted into something that might have been sympathy, though later Elena would wonder if she'd misread it completely. "That must be so hard for him," Natasha said softly, feeling like he's not needed. "Marriage isn't about one person controlling everything," Elena replied, though doubt had begun creeping into her thoughts during sleepless nights. "It's supposed to be a partnership." "Of course," Natasha agreed quickly. "I just mean, for a man like Vincent, it must be difficult being married to someone so powerful and successful. Not that it's your fault," she added hastily. "Just that I can see how it might make him feel inferior." The word hung between them, inferior, as if Elena's success somehow diminished Vincent rather than complimenting it. "I need to finish packing," Elena said, suddenly wanting the conversation to end. After Natasha left, Elena stared at her reflection in the mirror, wondering when her marriage had become something that required constant navigation and careful management rather than joy and partnership. The Tokyo trip lasted 3 days. 3 days of high-stakes negotiations with Japanese tech firms, of presentations and contracts and decisions that would affect thousands of employees. Elena returned exhausted, though exhilarated by the deal she'd closed, a partnership that would expand Castellano Industries into the Asian market in ways her father had always dreamed about. She wanted to tell Vincent about it, wanted to share this victory with the man she'd married. Instead, she came home to an empty house. A note on the kitchen counter said he'd gone out with friends. Would be back late. Don't wait up. Elena went to bed alone. The triumph of her business success, feeling hollow without anyone to share it with. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known was that while she'd been in Tokyo, Natasha had come to visit Vincent. Had found him sitting alone in the living room, a glass of whiskey in his hand, his expression dark and brooding. "You look miserable," Natasha had said, sitting beside him on the couch. Close enough that their knees touched. "She doesn't trust me," Vincent had replied, the alcohol loosening his tongue. "Her own husband, and she won't even consider letting me help manage the company." "What does that say about our marriage?" Natasha's hand had found his arm, her touch gentle and understanding in ways Elena's hadn't been lately. "It says she doesn't know what she has," Natasha had whispered, and then she'd leaned in. The kiss had been brief, tentative, testing boundaries that should never have been tested. Vincent had pulled back, shock and guilt wearing across his features. "We can't." "Why not?" Natasha had asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "She doesn't appreciate you, Vincent. She keeps you at arm's length, makes you feel small. I see you. I see how incredible you are. She's your best friend," Vincent had said, though his conviction was already weakening. "And she's married to the man I've been in love with since college," Natasha had replied. The confession hanging in the air like a confession and an accusation simultaneously. The second kiss had lasted longer. By the third, Vincent had stopped protesting altogether. Over the following weeks, their affair intensified, fueled by Vincent's resentment and Natasha's long-harbored feelings and the dangerous combination of proximity and opportunity. They met when Elena traveled for business, which happened frequently as she worked to expand the company her father had entrusted to her care. They told themselves it wasn't wrong because Elena was too focused on work to notice her marriage crumbling. They convinced themselves they deserved happiness, even if that happiness was built on deception and betrayal. And they began to plan. "Divorce her," Natasha said one night, lying in Vincent's arms in the bed he shared with his wife. "You're entitled to half of everything. Community property laws are clear about that. Half of $1 billion empire," Vincent mused, the idea taking root in his mind like a seed in fertile soil. "Think about what we could do with that kind of money," Natasha continued, her fingers tracing patterns on his chest. "We could start fresh somewhere new, build our own company, our own life, away from her shadow." Vincent was quiet for a long moment, calculations running through his mind. "She'd fight it," he said finally. "She'd make it difficult, drag it out in court for years. Her lawyers would destroy me. Then we wait," Natasha replied. "We wait for the right opportunity, something that gives us leverage." Neither of them knew that opportunity was coming sooner than they imagined, though not in any way they could have anticipated. 3 weeks later, Elena left for a business trip to Seattle, a meeting with potential investors, a tour of a facility they were considering acquiring. Decisions that required her presence and expertise. The drive back to the airport should have been routine. Instead, a truck driver fell asleep at the wheel. The collision happened at 70 miles per hour. Elena's car spun 3 times before slamming into a concrete barrier, metal crumpling like paper, glass shattering into thousands of pieces that caught the afternoon sunlight. When the paramedics pulled her from the wreckage, she was conscious, though barely. "My legs," she whispered, her voice weak and threaded with pain. "I can't feel my legs." The hospital in Seattle stabilized her, treating her for broken ribs, lacerations, and severe trauma to her lower spine, though the full extent of her injuries wouldn't be clear for days. They transferred her back home to a private hospital where specialists could evaluate the damage and determine her prognosis. Vincent received the call while Natasha was still at his house. He stood in the living room, phone pressed to his ear, listening to a hospital administrator explain that his wife had been in a catastrophic accident, that she was being transferred back for treatment, that he should come to the hospital as soon as possible. When he hung up, Natasha was watching him from the doorway. "How bad is it?" she asked, and the question held more calculation than concern. "Bad," Vincent replied. "Spal injury. They don't know yet if she'll walk again." Something passed between them in that moment, an unspoken understanding of what this could mean for their plans. "You should go to the hospital," Natasha said carefully. "It would look strange if you didn't." Vincent nodded, already thinking about how to play this, how to appear concerned while positioning himself for whatever opportunity might emerge from his wife's tragedy. The private hospital room was quiet when he arrived, filled with the steady beep of monitors and the soft hiss of medical equipment. Elena lay in the bed, her eyes closed, her breathing slow and even in a way that suggested sleep, though pain medication and exhaustion had pulled her under. Vincent stood at the foot of her, Clear's throat, bed for a long moment, studying her pale face, her motionless body beneath the white hospital blankets. He felt nothing, no fear for her recovery, no guilt about the affair he'd been having with her best friend. No love for the woman he'd promised to cherish in sickness and in health. Only cold calculation about what this meant for his future. He stepped outside into the corridor, pulling out his phone, needing to talk to Natasha, needing to process what was happening. The hallway was empty, visiting hours nearly over, only the distant sound of nurses at their station breaking the silence. The medication had worn off faster than the nurses expected, pulling her back to consciousness, while pain radiated through her spine, and her legs felt like they belonged to someone else. She'd been about to call for the nurse when she heard Vincent's voice in the hallway. At first, she thought he was talking to a doctor, discussing her condition with appropriate concern. Vincent pressed the phone to his ear, his voice low as Natasha answered. "I'm at the hospital," he said. "She's sleeping." "How does she look?" Natasha asked. "Broken," Vincent replied, glancing back through the window at Elena's motionless form. "The doctors haven't given me a full report yet, but from what the paramedics said, the spinal damage is severe." There was a pause on Natasha's end. "What are you thinking?" she asked carefully. Vincent's jaw tightened, and when he spoke, his voice carried an edge of something dark and calculating. Honestly, he lowered his voice even further, turning away from the window. "I wish she'd died in the accident." The words hung in the air between them, vicious and cold. "Vincent, no, I mean it," he continued, his tone matter of fact, as if discussing a business transaction rather than his wife's life. "If she died, the whole empire would be mine. No divorce, no fighting over assets, no splitting everything in half. Just mine, clean, simple." "But she didn't die," Natasha said quietly. "No," Vincent agreed, frustration bleeding into his voice. "Which means I'm stuck going through a divorce, fighting her lawyers for months or maybe years just to get what should rightfully be half mine anyway. The stress, the public scrutiny, the media coverage. It's going to be a nightmare." "Maybe," Natasha hesitated, "maybe this changes things. If she's badly injured, if she can't run the company anymore, then what?" Vincent interrupted. "I still have to divorce her to get anything. I still have to go through the legal process. The only difference is now I look like the bastard who abandoned his crippled wife instead of just a man leaving an unhappy marriage." Inside the hospital room, Elena's eyes opened. Her mind began to replay every word she heard. "I wish she'd died in the accident." Elena's breath caught in her throat, her entire body going rigid despite the pain. "The whole empire would be mine. No divorce, no fighting over assets." Each word was a knife, precise and deliberate, cutting through everything she'd believed about her marriage, about her husband, about the life they'd built together. "I'm stuck going through a divorce, fighting her lawyers for months or maybe years just to get what should rightfully be half mine." Vincent continued talking, his voice carrying clearly through the partially open door, discussing her potential death with the casual disappointment of someone who just missed a business opportunity. Elena lay perfectly still, her eyes open but unseeing, her mind racing despite the medication fogging her thoughts. He'd been planning to divorce her. The betrayal was so complete, so comprehensive that for a moment she couldn't process it. Then slowly, beneath the shock and pain, something else began to build. Something cold, something calculating, something that would require patience and planning and absolute precision. Vincent ended his call and returned to the room, his expression shifting into concern as he approached her bed. Elena kept her eyes closed, her breathing steady, giving no indication that she'd heard anything. "Elena," Vincent said softly, placing his hand on her arm with false tenderness. "I'm here now. Everything's going to be okay." The touch made her skin crawl, though she didn't move, didn't react, didn't give him any sign that she was awake and aware and already planning her next move. After a few minutes, Vincent's phone buzzed, and he stepped back out into the hallway to take another call. Elena opened her eyes and stared at the ceiling, her mind already working. When the doctor finally came in an hour later to check on her, Elena was ready. "Doctor," she said, her voice weak, though her thoughts were sharp and clear. "I need to know the truth about my legs. Will I be able to walk again?" The doctor, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and gentle hands, sat down beside the bed. "It's too early to say definitively," she replied. "The swelling around your spine needs to reduce before we can assess the full extent of the damage, but I'm cautiously optimistic. With physical therapy and time, there's a good chance you'll regain most of your mobility." Elena absorbed this information, relief and strategy warring in her chest. "When my husband comes back," Elena said carefully, "I need you to tell him something different." The doctor's expression shifted to confusion. "I don't understand." "Tell him I'll be confined to a wheelchair for the rest of my life," Elena interrupted, her voice steady despite everything. "Tell him the damage is permanent and irreversible. Mrs. Kane, I can't lie to your husband about your medical condition." "I'm not asking you to lie," Elena said, though they both knew that's exactly what she was asking. "I'm asking you to give him the worst-case scenario while we wait for the swelling to reduce and the full picture to emerge. I need to know something about him, about how he'll react. Please." The doctor studied her for a long moment, and something in Elena's expression must have conveyed the desperation and determination behind the request. "This is highly irregular," the doctor said finally. "I know," Elena replied. "But please, I'm begging you." After a long pause, the doctor nodded slowly. "I'll present it as the most likely outcome based on preliminary scans," she said. "But Mrs. Kane, whatever you're planning." "Thank you," Elena interrupted, unwilling to discuss her motivations or her emerging plan. When Vincent returned to the room, the doctor delivered the news with professional gravity. "Mr. Kane, I need to discuss your wife's prognosis with you." They stepped outside and Elena listened through the partially open door as the doctor explained in carefully chosen words that the spinal damage appeared severe, that Elena would likely never walk again, that she should prepare for life in a wheelchair. Vincent's response was telling in its brevity. "I see," he said, his voice flat. "Thank you, doctor. No questions about treatment options. No inquiries about therapy or experimental procedures. No desperation to explore every possible avenue for his wife's recovery. Just cold acceptance of information that served his purposes perfectly." Elena closed her eyes and began to plan. Elena made a group phone call from her hospital bed the next morning with 5 people holding key position in the company. James Harrison, the company lawyer; David Strong, her account manager; Patricia Morrison, the company's financial analyst; Robert Clenny, the general manager; and Michelle Torres, her personal assistant, her voice steady despite the pain medication making her thoughts feel like they were moving through water. Mrs. Kane with concern evident in their voices. "We heard about the accident. How are you, Ma?" "I need you to make Castellano Industries look bankrupt," Elena interrupted, her words precise and deliberate. "Every news outlet needs to report that the company has collapsed. Total liquidation, debts, overwhelming assets, the whole empire crumbling." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Mom," Harrison said carefully, "do you understand what you're asking? The stock price alone would, none of it will be real." Elena clarified. "I need you to work with as a team to create the appearance of bankruptcy while protecting every actual asset in structures Vincent can't touch. Trusts, offshore accounts, shell corporations, whatever it takes. But to the outside world, to the media, to anyone investigating Castellano Industries needs to look completely destroyed." Another pause, longer this time. "May we ask why?" I need to know who my husband really is, Elena said quietly. And I already have my answer. Now I need to protect what my father built before Vincent tries to take it. There was quiet for a moment then. When do you need this done? Immediately, Elena replied, and there's one more thing. Our joint account has 3 million in it. I want you to monitor it. Don't freeze it, don't protect it, just watch it. I need to see what he does. You're testing him, Patricia said, understanding dawning in his voice. I already know he'll fail, Elena replied. I just need documentation for what comes next. 5 days after the accident, Vincent still hadn't visited. Elena lay in her hospital bed alone except for the nurses who checked on her regularly, watching news coverage of her company's spectacular collapse play out across every financial channel. The coverage was perfect, devastating and comprehensive, with analysts discussing how Castellano Industries had overextended itself, how debts had mounted secretly, how the sudden death of its founder had exposed fundamental weaknesses that led to total collapse. None of it was true, though the financial documents the team had created were flawless, foolproof, convincing enough to deceive even sophisticated investors. On the 7th day, Patriasia with news. He emptied the joint account this morning. Harrison said, all 3 million wire transferred to an account in his name only. Elena closed her eyes, the confirmation landing like a physical blow, even though she'd expected exactly this. Thank you, she said quietly. Elena, Patricia's voice was gentle. I'm sorry, don't be. Elena replied, you're helping me see clearly for the first time in 2 years. That afternoon, Vincent finally came to the hospital, but he didn't come alone. Natasha walked beside him, her hand resting possessively on his arm, both of them wearing expressions that were carefully neutral, though their body language screamed intimacy and ownership. They entered Elena's room together, and the sight of them, her husband and her best friend, standing united against her, crystallized everything she'd heard in Vincent's phone call, everything she'd suspected, everything she'd now confirmed. Elena, Vincent said, his voice flat and businesslike. We need to talk. He pulled divorce papers from inside his jacket and dropped them onto her lap with casual cruelty. You can't walk anymore, he continued, each word chosen to wound. The doctors were clear about that, and according to every news station in the country, your father's company just collapsed. Total bankruptcy, everything liquidated. He leaned forward slightly and his next words came out with vicious precision. I can't spend the rest of my life tied to a crippled deadweight who brings nothing to this marriage. You're broken, Elena, physically, financially, completely broken. Natasha's hand tightened on Vincent's arm, her expression a perfect mask of sympathetic concern that didn't quite hide the satisfaction in her eyes. This is really for the best, Natasha added softly. You need to focus on your recovery, and Vincent needs to move forward with someone who can actually be a partner to him. The irony of her best friend calling herself a partner while stealing her husband wasn't lost on Elena, though she kept her face carefully blank, showing nothing of the cold fury building in her chest. Sign the papers, Vincent said. Let's end this cleanly so we can all move on with our lives. Elena's hand trembled, not from weakness, though they would interpret it that way, rather from the effort of containing everything she wanted to say, everything she wanted to scream, every accusation and revelation she was holding back for the right moment. She signed without speaking, her name across the bottom of the page, ending a marriage that had died the moment Vincent wished for her death in a hospital corridor. Vincent took the papers without looking at her face, checked the signature with the casual efficiency of someone completing a business transaction, then turned to leave. Natasha paused at the door, glancing back with an expression that might have been pity if it wasn't so clearly triumph. I hope you find some peace, Elena, Natasha said quietly. Then they left together, Vincent's arm around Natasha's waist, their bodies pressed close as the door clicked shut behind them. Elena stared at the ceiling and began her recovery with a focus and determination that surprised even her physical therapists. 1 month later, the divorce was official, processed quickly because Elena didn't contest anything, didn't fight for assets or make demands. Simply let Vincent walk away with his clean break and his $3 million and his new relationship built on betrayal. Vincent used the money to start a real estate company in a smaller city 2 hours away, somewhere he and Natasha could build their new life away from the wreckage of Elena's supposed destruction. The company grew modestly over the following year, though Vincent positioned himself as a successful entrepreneur who'd escaped a failing marriage and built something from nothing, conveniently omitting the $3 million in stolen funds that had financed his fresh start. 12 months after the divorce, while Vincent planned his wedding and Elena worked quietly to regain full use of her legs, through intensive therapy that few people knew about, an invitation arrived. Cream cardstock with gold embossing, Vincent, Kane and Natasha. William requests the honor of your presence at their wedding. And tucked inside in Natasha's distinctive handwriting, the real message. Elena, we'd be honored if you could join us. We know it's been a difficult year for you, but we wanted to include you in our happiness. The venue is fully accessible for wheelchairs. We made certain of that. Please come see what real love looks like. Elena read the note 3 times. Each word a transparent attempt at humiliation disguised as kindness. A final insult designed to showcase their triumph over her destruction. She picked up her phone and called her personal assistant. Book the jet, arrange full security detail, and prepare my car. I have a wedding to attend. On the wedding day, Elena's private jet touched down at the small municipal airport. The aircraft's arrival noted by ground crews who recognized the Castellano Industries tail number and whispered among themselves about how that company had supposedly collapsed a year ago. Inside the venue, 300 guests filled the rows of white chairs, business associates, and investors and partners who'd helped Vincent build his modest empire over the past 12 months. Natasha stood in the bridal suite wearing a dress that cost more than most people's monthly rent, adjusting her veil with hands that trembled slightly with excitement. Do you think she'll actually come? She asked Vincent, who was checking his reflection in a full-length mirror. Probably not, Vincent replied, straightening his tie. She's too proud to let people see her like that, broken, bankrupt, confined to a wheelchair. But if she does show up, everyone here will see exactly what I escaped from. He turned to Natasha, his expression satisfied. They'll see the difference between a dead weight and a real partner, he continued. Between someone who holds you back and someone who lifts you up. Natasha smiled, though something in her expression suggested she wasn't entirely convinced Elena wouldn't find a way to disrupt their perfect day. What if she makes a scene? Natasha asked quietly. Vincent laughed, the sound cold and dismissive. What's she going to do? She's crippled and penniless. We hold all the cards now. The ceremony was minutes from starting when the commotion began. Someone near the entrance made a sound, something between a gasp and a choke. Then another guest turned, their eyes widening. The whispers started rippling through the assembled crowd like a stone dropped in still water. The string quartet faltered mid-song, one violinist missing a note, then another, until the music died entirely as all 4 musicians turned to stare at the entrance. Vincent felt it before he saw it. The shift in the room's energy, the way every head turned toward the doors, the sudden silence that fell over 300 people like a heavy blanket. He turned, irritation flashing across his face, and froze. The doors stood open. Elena Castellano walked through them. Walked. Not in a wheelchair, not using a cane, not struggling or limping or showing any sign of the permanent disability the doctors had diagnosed. Walking on legs that moved with perfect grace and confidence, wearing a gown that shimmered like liquid silver and probably cost more than the entire wedding budget. Her hair styled in elegant waves that caught the light. Surrounded by 6 men in dark suits, who moved with the precision of professional security detail, she walked down the aisle, the same aisle Natasha was supposed to walk down in 10 minutes, and every eye in the venue followed her. The whispers grew louder. Is that Elena Castellano? She's walking. How is she walking? I thought she was paralyzed. Wasn't her company bankrupt? Why does she have security? That dress is Valentino? How can she afford? Vincent's face drained of all color, his mouth opening and closing without sound as his mind struggled to process what he was seeing. Beside him, Natasha swayed slightly, her bouquet trembling in hands that had suddenly gone numb. Elena reached the front of the venue and stopped, her eyes finding Vincent across the crowded space, her expression serene and composed and absolutely terrifying in its calm. The MC, a nervous young man who'd been hired to keep the ceremony running smoothly, approached Elena with a microphone, his hands shaking. Castellano, he stammered, we weren't expecting it. Would you like to say a few words? Elena's fingers closed around the microphone with practiced ease, the gesture natural and commanding in a way that suggested she'd spoken to crowds much larger than this one. She turned to face the assembled guests, her security detail positioned discreetly behind her, and smiled. Thank you, she said, her voice clear and strong, carrying to every corner of the venue. I apologize for the interruption, but when I received the invitation to this wedding, I felt compelled to attend. Vincent tried to speak, to object, to regain control of the situation, though his voice came out as barely a whisper. Elena, you see, Elena continued, ignoring him completely. I believe it's important to witness moments of truth, and today we're all going to witness several important truths. She paused, letting the silence build, watching as phones began emerging from pockets and purses as guests leaned forward in their seats. 13 months ago, I was in a car accident, Elena said. Severe spinal trauma. The doctors initially thought I might never walk again. Her eyes found Vincent, my husband at the time, the groom standing before you, visited me in the hospital exactly once. During that visit, I overheard him on the phone outside my room, telling his girlfriend that he wished I had died in the accident, because then, you see, he could inherit my father's empire without the stress of divorce proceedings. The gasps rippled through the crowd like a wave. Natasha's face went white. That girlfriend, Elena continued calmly, was my best friend since college. The woman who is currently wearing a white dress and standing beside him. She turned to address the crowd more fully. What my husband didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that I heard every word, and in that moment, I made several decisions. Elena's smile never wavered. First, I asked my doctors to tell him my condition was permanent and irreversible. I wanted to see what kind of man I'd married. Would he stay? Would he support me through recovery? Or would he run? She paused. He ran. He divorced me while I lay in a hospital bed, calling me a crippled deadweight in front of medical staff, taking every cent from our joint account and leaving me with nothing. Vincent finally found his voice. That's not the company was bankrupt. You had nothing. Ah, yes. Elena interrupted smoothly. The bankruptcy. That was my second decision. You see, I instructed my lawyers to create the appearance of total financial collapse. Every news outlet reported it. Every financial analyst believed it. And most importantly, you believed it. She gestured to her security detail. But Castellano Industries never actually failed. Every asset was protected. Every employee kept their job. Every contract honored. The bankruptcy was theater performed specifically for an audience of 2 people who were planning to steal half of my father's legacy. The crowd was completely silent now, every eye fixed on Elena. The $3 million Vincent took from our joint account, Elena continued, that was a test. Money I left deliberately accessible to see if he would steal from someone he believed was crippled and penniless. He took every cent within hours of the bankruptcy news breaking. She turned back to Vincent, whose face had gone from white to a sickly gray. That money financed the company you've spent the last year building, didn't it, Vincent? The company you've told everyone you started from nothing. The company that's currently negotiating contracts with several of the people in this room. Vincent's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Elena addressed the crowd again. I'm here today not for revenge, though I won't pretend this doesn't feel satisfying. I'm here to deliver a message about character, about loyalty, about what happens when you abandon people during their darkest moments and build your success on cruelty and theft. She paused, letting her words sink in. Never trust a man who abandons his wife in a hospital bed. Never trust a woman who steals her best friend's husband while that friend fights for recovery. And never ever build a business relationship with people whose foundation is betrayal, because if they'll do it to someone they vowed to love, they'll certainly do it to you. Phones were out now throughout the crowd, some recording, others already typing furiously. Elena could see Vincent's investors and partners exchanging glances. See the calculations happening behind their eyes. See the exact moment several of them decided to cut their losses. One man in the third row stood up. Vincent, he said loudly, we need to talk about our contract immediately. Another rose. The loan we discussed, I'm going to have to reconsider. Then another and another. The venue erupted in whispered conversations, in hurried phone calls, in the sound of business relationships dissolving in real time. Natasha reached for Vincent's arm, her face stray with tears that had ruined her carefully applied makeup. Vincent, do something. But there was nothing to do. Elena handed the microphone back to the MC, who took it with trembling hands and turned to leave. Her security detail fell into formation around her, and she walked back down the aisle she'd entered through, her head high, her steps confident, leaving chaos and destruction in her wake. Behind her, she heard Natasha's voice rising in panic, heard Vincent trying desperately to explain, to salvage something from the wreckage, to convince people that Elena was lying or exaggerating or manipulating the truth. But the damage was done. By the time Elena reached her car, phones throughout the venue were broadcasting what had happened. Social media was exploding with the story, and the empire Vincent had built on stolen money and betrayal was crumbling faster than he could possibly contain. Elena settled into the backseat of her car, her driver pulling away from the venue as police cars approached. Someone had apparently reported the use of stolen funds, likely one of Vincent's now former investors looking to protect themselves from association with fraud. She pulled out her phone and called Harrison. It's done, she said simply. I'm watching it unfold on social media, Harrison, clears throat, replied, something like admiration in his voice. Every business news outlet is covering it. Vincent Ca's company is finished. Several partners have already announced they're pulling out, and there are calls for investigation into the source of his startup funding. Good, Elena said quietly. How do you feel? Harrison asked. Elena considered the question as her car merged onto the highway, carrying her away from the wedding that had transformed into a reckoning, away from the people who'd betrayed her toward a future that was entirely her own. Free, she said finally. I feel free. The wedding venue behind her descended into chaos. Guests leaving in confusion. Vendors demanding payment that Vincent could no longer guarantee. Investors making urgent phone calls to distance themselves from a man whose character had been exposed in the most public way possible. And in the bridal suite, Natasha stood alone, her wedding dress perfect and pristine, while outside, Vincent argued desperately with lawyers on his phone, trying to salvage something from the empire that had just collapsed around him. The dead weight they discarded had walked back into their lives, and in doing so, had destroyed everything they'd built on her pain. Dear viewers, in the shadows of betrayal, strength is born. In the valley of abandonment, wisdom rises. This story unveils a truth as old as time. That cruelty planted in darkness will harvest its own destruction in the light. You will witness how patience becomes power, how silence transforms into thunder, and how the underestimated rise to reclaim their throne. When the world calls you broken, remember diamonds are forged under pressure. Drop in the comments what lessons you learned from Elena's journey and what you would have done differently if you were in her shoes. Don't forget to subscribe for more captivating, entertaining, and life-changing stories that teach powerful lessons about resilience, justice, and human nature.